Hold on, faithfully conveying value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're interpreting the book called The Hub, 3,000 Years of China, authored by a political science scholar, Professor Shi Zhan, director of the World Politics Research Center at China Foreign Affairs University. As a civilization, China has two major characteristics: extraordinary longevity and super large scale. So-called extraordinary longevity means that over 3,500 years, from the Shang to Qing dynasties, despite constant changes in dynasties, Chinese civilization has continued uninterrupted. Super large scale means that dynasties like Qin, Han, Sui, Tang, and Qing dominated East Asia, ruling not only the Central Plains but also vast areas like grasslands, plateaus, forests, and oceans. Thus, China has vast territories and a large population base, with ecological and cultural diversity. Possessing both these characteristics makes China unique among the world's many civilizations. Jewish civilization has a long history, but its scale has always been limited. The Roman and Ottoman empires were once vast empires spanning Europe, Asia, and Africa, but they collapsed long ago. Only China has endured for millennia without decline, and despite setbacks in modern times, it has revitalized.
Such tenacity and resilience are extremely rare among large-scale nations throughout history.
So, how did this uniqueness of China come about? And what significance does it have for China today? The book The Hub, we're about to discuss, analyzes and explains this with a grand vision, integrating China's historical process. Building on this, the author further proposes that China's geographical location at the eastern end of Eurasia, facing the vast ocean, makes it a hub between continental and maritime civilizations, thus playing a more significant role. This is also the meaning of the book titled The Hub. Next, we'll discuss this book in 3 parts. Part 1 covers 3 major geographical spaces: the Central Plains, Inner Asia, and the ocean. Part 2 discusses 3 structural transformations: feudal society, aristocratic society, and commoner society. Part 3 covers 3 ruling ideologies: Confucianism, legalism, and Buddhism.
All right, let's start with part 1. China's 3 major geographical spaces, including the Central Plains, Inner Asia, and the ocean.
First, let's talk about geographical spaces. The Central Plains, in a narrow sense, refers to today's Henan province, especially areas like Luoyang, Zhenzhou, and Kaifeng, which have always been contested strategic points. This is related to the geographical environment. Unfold the map and you'll find the Central Plains location is quite special. Situated in the middle and lower reaches of the Yellow River, surrounded by towering mountains, only this large central area is a fertile plain suitable for agriculture and rich in natural resources. Compared to mountainous areas and plateaus, transportation in the Central Plains was much more convenient, facilitating trade and gathering people and wealth. Therefore, since ancient times, primitive civilizations from various regions, like the northern Hongshan and Longshan cultures and southern Hemudu and Liangzhu cultures, gradually converged toward the Central Plains. And then they merged with the locally originated Yangshao culture, ultimately giving birth to China's earliest state forms and the so-called 3 dynasties: Xia, Shang, and Zhao. It's in this sense we say the Central Plains is the main birthplace of Huaxia civilization. This also explains why it became the main battlefield whenever heroes rose to contend for supremacy during dynastic declines. Because only by leveraging the Central Plains' substantial wealth, large population, and rich cultural heritage could a regional power confidently establish a nationwide regime, what we call a Central Plains dynasty. Over time, the Central Plains evolved from a purely geographical concept to a political one, becoming a symbol of supreme imperial power. Simply put, whoever controlled the Central Plains was considered legitimate and possessed the mandate to rule. In the late Eastern Han Dynasty, Zhuge Liang's strategy for Liu Bei was to use Sichuan and Shanxi as base areas.
When the opportunity arose, they would launch a two-pronged offensive to capture the Central Plains. Zhuge Liang himself saw conquering the Central Plains as the symbol of restoring the Han dynasty. Liu Yu, a powerful minister of the Eastern Jin, only replaced the dynasty after achieving glorious military victories by capturing Luoyang and Chang'an, thus establishing the Lusong dynasty. Before proclaiming himself emperor, Ming founder Zhu Yuanzhang issued the Edict to the Central Plains to overthrow the Yuan dynasty, signifying heaven's mandate and demonstrating the Central Plains' symbolic importance. Yet Central Plains dynasty's expansion had its natural limit, the Great Wall. For example, the Ming established 9 frontier garrisons along the wall, stretching 6,300 kilometers from Shanhai Pass to Jiayu Pass, forming its northern border. This essentially defined the Ming's northern frontier. So what factor determined this boundary? The answer is precipitation. Central Plains dynasties depended on agriculture as their lifeline. Farming requires at least 400 millimeters annual rainfall. Below this threshold, agriculture couldn't sustain livelihoods, and China's 400 millimeter precipitation line coincides exactly with the Great Wall, forming a distinct pattern. South of the Great Wall is the Central Plains in a broad sense, while north is Inner Asia or Inland Asia. The term Asia originally came from Western historians. The book's author adopts it to denote the entire Mongolian plateau, northeast China, Xinjiang, Tibet, and most of Central Asia. This region includes grasslands, plateaus, deserts, and forests, varying greatly, but sharing low precipitation, making agriculture unsustainable alone. Therefore, the primary lifestyle in Inner Asia is nomadic or semi-nomadic, with people unable to settle long-term. They must constantly migrate to follow water and pasture, meaning Inner Asia's governance model is starkly different from that of the Central Plains. In the Central Plains, the main population are farmers who live in the same place for generations, making management and taxation convenient. Central Plains dynasties could collect massive and stable taxes at relatively low costs, supporting a strong central government that effectively ruled all regions. In Inner Asia, high mobility increases management costs exponentially, and nomadic societies' wealth accumulation is inferior to agricultural societies. Thus, in Inner Asia's history, centralized systems rarely appeared. Instead, tribes large and small ruled their own areas independently. Even powerful steppe empires, like the Xiongnu in the Han dynasty, Rouran in the northern and southern dynasties, and Turks in the Tang dynasty, were confederations of tribes, with their khans constrained by tribal nobles. Their power couldn't compare to that of Central Plains emperors. Given these differences, governing Inner Asia with Central Plains methods obviously doesn't work, and vice versa. So, should they go their separate ways? No, because economically, the Central Plains and Inner Asia have inseparable ties. Inner Asia lacks resources and has a fragile ecosystem. It needs to buy grain, cloth, and tea from the Central Plains, especially during extreme weather. Central Plains dynasties need Inner Asia's livestock and horses, especially high-quality war horses. Moreover, for Central Plains dynasties to interact with the Middle East and Europe further west, they must communicate through Inner Asia. The Silk Road for East-West trade runs through Inner Asia. Of course, there's also a side of mutual harm between the Central Plains and Inner Asia. How so? If the climate is too harsh and the nomadic economy collapses, northern nomadic tribes will invade south to plunder or even overthrow Central Plains dynasties. Central Plains dynasties, for various reasons, sometimes restrict or even cut off trade with Inner Asia, which also causes serious conflicts. This relationship of coexistence yet conflicting interests creates a need for unification between the Central Plains and Inner Asia. 1. Because only a ruler who transcends both can bridge differences and coordinate interests. So, where can we find such a ruler who understands both the Central Plains and Inner Asia? Look to the transitional zone between the Central Plains and Inner Asia, namely along the Great Wall and the Northeast region. And this area blends both agricultural and nomadic traits, and regimes rising here grasped the secrets of controlling Inner Asia and governing the Central Plains, developing a dual governance model. Govern the Central Plains based on its characteristics and Inner Asia based on its own, creating empires larger than typical Central Plains dynasties. Of course, this evolved over time, from the northern way of the Tuoba Xianbei to the Liao dynasty of the Khitan people, and finally the Qing dynasty, where the dual governance model became highly refined. King emperors held supreme imperial power in the Central Plains, while also bearing the highest title in Inner Asia. As Mongol Khans, they used flexible tactics to implement governance different from the Central Plains in border areas, maintaining national stability. This is why the Qing dynasty's peak territory reached 13.16 million square kilometers, far exceeding typical Central Plains dynasties. With that, we conclude the discussion on the Central Plains and Inner Asia. Now, let's move to the third major geographical space, the ocean. Traditionally, China is seen as a continental country with underdeveloped maritime culture. This holds some truth but shouldn't be overgeneralized. For example, during the Southern Song dynasty, with the Central Plains occupied and the Silk Road cut off, the government aggressively expanded overseas markets. So, 20% of fiscal revenue came from maritime trade. Quote, Maritime trade in the Yuan dynasty was also highly developed. Yangzhou, Quanzhou, and Guangzhou were international hubs with bustling commerce. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, the southeast coast's population boom became unsustainable. So many went abroad to earn a living, sparking the trend of migrating to Southeast Asia, and now are the chief crew line. Overseas Chinese gradually built a vast, intricate commercial network in Southeast Asia, tightly linking China's economy with the region. However, the Ming and Qing governments focused on continental rule, neglected maritime rights, and rarely gave political or military support to overseas Chinese in Nanyang. Thus, when Spanish and British colonists arrived, they quickly seized economic dominance in Southeast Asia from the Chinese through violence. China's neglect of the ocean wasn't reversed until after the two Opium Wars. Modern China's greatest threat no longer came from inner Asian nomads, but from the sea. Western powers also brought modern civilization, new concepts like science, democracy, and freedom. Innovations like electric lights, railways, and steamships arrived via sea routes, while overseas trade became increasingly vital to China's economy. Before the anti-Japanese war broke out, tariff revenue already accounted for over 50% of fiscal income. The book's author argues this signaled diminished importance of the Central Plains Inner Asia transition zone, with China's pivotal hub shifting to the coastal interface between continent and ocean. Indeed, since modern times, the southeastern coast, represented by Yangtze and Pearl River deltas, has led China's modernization. All right, that concludes China's three major geographical spaces. If geographical features explain super large scale, then Part 2, China's three structural transformations, explains extraordinary continuity. What are these three transformations? Feudal society, aristocratic society, and commoner society. We'll examine them one by one. First, feudal society spanned from the Zhou dynasty's founding to Qin's unification, over 800 years. China's feudal system began in the Shang dynasty and crystallized under the Zhou. According to Warring States philosopher Xunzi, the early Zhou king infeft 71 lords, 53 from royal lineage, 18 meritorious outsiders. The Zhou king first granted territories to lords, who then subdivided portions to ministers. Ministers further divided lands among scholar officials, creating a pyramid power structure. The Zhao king occupied the apex, with lords below, then ministers and scholar officials. What maintained this pyramid stability? Ritual laws? Ritual laws defined each person's position, and corresponding rights and duties. For example, lords could tax and administer justice in their domains. Lordships were hereditary. Meanwhile, lords owed duties to the Zhou king, assisting governance, regular tributes, military service, and escort duties. Similar lord minus minister and minister scholar obligations created equilibrium. The Zhou king held royal authority to command lords, but he was also constrained by them, both acting within ritual law's bounds, ensuring feudal stability. However, this equilibrium gradually broke down. This happened because continuous enfeoffment reduced the Zhou king's lands and resources, while lords grew stronger and more ambitious. By mid-Western Zhou, some lords refused tributes and attacked each other. To maintain authority, the Zhou king took measures. King Yi of Zhou executed Duke Ai of Qi by boiling him alive as a warning. King Li of Zhou nationalized mountains, forests, and lakes under royal control. He aimed to increase revenue and strengthen royal power.
This faced universal opposition. King Li was exiled, marking the complete shift of power to lords.
King Yu's assassination and Western Zhou's collapse were nearly the final blows from lords. Entering Eastern Zhou, lords ruled independently, and feudalism rapidly disintegrated. By the Warring States period, prefecture-county systems replaced feudalism. Under this system, monarchs appointed officials who answered directly to them. This facilitated centralized rule. China's first unified dynasty, Qin, implemented high centralization, but as the saying goes, a centipede dies but never falls down. Late Qin saw 6 states remnants rebel, forming a feudal-like coalition under Shan Yu until Western Han eradicated feudalism. Han rulers adopted 2 measures to achieve this. First, Emperor Gaozu instituted the White Horse Oath, restricting kingships to Liu clan members. Though weakening feudalism, Liu kings still threatened the throne, as seen in the Seven Kingdoms Rebellion, until suppressed. Emperor Wu issued the Decree of Grace, requiring kings to divide fiefs among all sons upon death. Thus, over time, kingdoms fragmented until vanishing. Emperor Wu thus ended feudalism, transitioning China to its second structural phase, the aristocratic society lasting from late Han to late Tang, about 1,000 years. Aristocrats included local magnates, military nobles, and great clans. They controlled regions and court politics through powerful networks, shaping aristocratic society. You might wonder, under Emperor Wu of Han's harsh crackdown, the lords couldn't stir up trouble. So where did the aristocratic families come from? Actually, the rise of aristocratic families was unexpected by Emperor Wu, but this situation was caused by himself.
Emperor Wu waged war against the Xiongnu for decades, achieving brilliant victories.
But as I mentioned earlier, traditional Central Plains dynasties often had limits to their rule. Exceeding these limits came at a heavy cost. Due to years of warfare, Emperor Wu depleted the treasury and plundered civilian wealth, causing farmer bankruptcies and societal decline. According to statistics, in Emperor Wu's later years, over 2 million refugees in Guangdong alone sought survival by joining local magnates, empowering them into aristocratic families. With powerful clan networks, aristocratic families began exerting political influence, peaking in the Eastern Han dynasty. Emperor Guangwu of Han, Lu Xiu, himself was a Central Plains aristocratic family member. He overthrew Wang Mang's regime with support from many aristocratic families. Therefore, from the start, Eastern Han emperors had to employ aristocratic families to rule the court. Key ministers and regional governors were monopolized by aristocratic families, formally establishing aristocratic ministers. This pattern continued until the Sui and Tang dynasties. For example, the Chaowei regime in the Three Kingdoms relied on Central Plains and Hebei aristocratic families. Eastern Wu relied on Jiandong families. Later, Eastern Jin emperors were near figureheads, with real power held by clans like Longyao Wang, Chen Zhanxi. Sui and Tang imperial families both came from the Guanlong aristocratic group, so scholars argue Tang replacing Sui was an internal power shift within Guanlong without revolutionary change. Of course, in aristocratic society, emperors had much more power than Zhou kings, controlling official appointments and rich revenues, mobilizing incomparable resources. Therefore, by the Sui and Tang periods, centralization was restored. Emperors were constrained by aristocratic families only to some extent. But imperial power's essence is exclusivity. For emperors, suppressing aristocratic families to fully grasp power was a constant pursuit. Emperor Yang of Sui used excessive means, faced backlash from Guanlong, and met downfall, while Tang emperors were more flexible. On one hand, they maintained aristocratic privileges, reserving high offices for them. On the other, they used the imperial exam to promote commoners as grassroots officials. With commoners included, the balance between emperor and aristocratic families tilted toward the former. This was a prolonged process. Throughout the Tang dynasty, exam-selected officials constituted only about 10% of the total, with aristocratic families still dominating most social resources. What truly overturned aristocratic society was the massive turmoil from late Tang through the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. During this upheaval, aristocratic clans were devastated and swept away. Thus, Chinese society entered its third structural shift, toward commoner society, spanning from northern Song to late Qing, lasting about a millennium. The 5 dynasties era was ruled by military strongmen. Whoever controlled armies could become king. After Song's founding nobility, emperors prioritized civil over military authority, using scholar officials to control generals. The exam system became the main path for commoners to enter government. Meanwhile, printing advancements accelerated this change. Previously, education costs were prohibitive, so even during Sui Tang exams, only officials or wealthy families' children participated. From mid-northern Song, movable type printing/book costs, making knowledge accessible and fueling commoners' exam ambitions to change their fate. Renowned Song ministers like Fan Zhongyan, Ouyang Shi, and Wen Tianxin came from modest backgrounds. Their ancestors were low-ranking officials at best, all launching careers through exams. Statistics show exam-selected officials rose from 40% in northern Song to 70% in southern Song, with commoners forming a significant portion. This defines the so-called commoner society. Interestingly, after commoner society matured, China never experienced prolonged division again. Yuan-Ming-Qing transitions were largely continuous, with only brief warlord conflicts that quickly reunified. Why? The author argues that without aristocratic constraints, centralization intensified. Imperial control over finances, military, and bureaucracy reached unprecedented levels, creating a strong state, weak society dynamic. The court, specifically the emperor, monopolized resources, depriving local forces of manpower and wealth needed for separatism. While we call China a unified society, strictly speaking, this was only achieved after entering the commoner era. In summary, over 3 millennia, from Western Zhou to late Qing, ancient China underwent 3 structural transformations. From feudal to aristocratic to commoner society, centralization gradually strengthened, imperial power solidified, making China a unified society.
Now, in part 3, we'll explore how ruling ideologies evolved and crystallized during these social transformations.
Simply put, there were 3 ruling ideologies: legalism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. First, let's discuss legalism and Confucianism, both emerging during the spring and autumn and warring states periods. At that time, royal authority declined, rituals collapsed, and feudal lords warred constantly. In 259 BCE, Qin conquered eastern Zhao, ending the Zhao dynasty. Afterwards, warfare between states intensified, and bloodshed escalated. Meanwhile, the 100 schools of thought proposed doctrines to help states prevail and restore stability. Among them, legalism and Confucianism became most prominent, clashing directly in the Confucian liberal debate. Legalism won this round because Confucianism's ritual restoration and benevolent governance seemed impractical during warfare. Conversely, legalism emphasized using harsh laws to control subjects, mobilizing maximum resources to conquer rivals. History proved legalists empowered states like Wei and Chu, while Qin, implementing it most thoroughly, became a war machine that unified China. Legalism's flaw was over-reliance on force and severe penalties, making rule unsustainable. Hence, Qin collapsed after two emperors. Then Confucianism took the stage. What roles did it play? First, establishing social order at lower cost. Confucianism emphasized ritual hierarchies requiring strict behavioral conformity. By the Han Dynasty, the three bonds and five constants, ruler guides subject, father guides son, husband guides wife, became ritual core. This meant all relationships, familial to political, followed behavioral norms, establishing patriarchy-based order. Through education and indoctrination, Confucianism made people internalize obedience, accepting their destined roles. Thus, ruling costs became far lower than under legalism's harsh methods.
Second, ensuring the dynasty's long-term stability.
Confucian benevolent governance doctrine requires rulers to treat people well, avoid heavy taxes, and unnecessary wars. This aligns with agricultural reasoning. Limited productivity means excessive demands easily bankrupt farmers. Add natural disasters, and the entire agricultural system collapses. Dynasties would then fall. Benevolent governance focuses on rulers restraining ambitions, keeping tax burdens reasonable. During disasters, timely imperial relief prevents mass refugee crises and maintains stability. Moreover, Confucian loyalty to rulers greatly appealed to monarchs. Emperor Wu's exclusive adoption of Confucianism stemmed largely from its theoretical justification of absolute imperial power. Once established, this mindset became unshakable. In aristocratic societies like Eastern Jin, powerful clans controlled court politics while emperors became figureheads, even deposed at will. Yet the imperial institution endured. Since Han, Confucianism became the dominant ruling ideology. Note: this wasn't pure Confucianism, but incorporated legalist elements as legalism remained indispensable. Rulers preached benevolence publicly, while secretly using legalist techniques to control subjects. This was Confucian-legalist complementarity. Strictly speaking, Central Plains dynasty's ruling philosophy blended Confucianism and legalism into imperial statecraft. However, both originated in the Central Plains, tailored to its environment and social conditions. Beyond the Great Wall and Inner Asia, they proved ineffective. For example, Inner Asia's high mobility made Confucian rituals impractical, while tribal constraints on khans undermined legalist enforcement. This wasn't critical for purely Central Plains dynasties like Ming, they ignored Beyond the Wall, but posed problems for Qing, which ruled both regions. Clearly, Confucianism and legalism alone were insufficient. Qing rulers needed a third ideology: Tibetan Buddhism. Why? This introduces the Manchu-Mongol alliance. Qing governed Inner Asia through Mongolia's tribal confederation, strengthened by marriage and Tibetan Buddhism. So, how do we understand Tibetan Buddhism? Originally, since mid-Ming dynasty, Mongolian tribes gradually embraced Tibetan Buddhism. Later, even the most prestigious title on the Mongolian plateau, Great Khan, had to be conferred by Tibetan Buddhist leaders. This meant whoever controlled Tibetan Buddhist leaders could control the Mongolian tribes. The Qing rulers clearly understood this and actively facilitated it. In 1653, Shunzi, first Qing emperor after entering China, officially recognized the fifth Dalai Lama. Since then, every Dalai Lama required central government recognition for legitimacy. The same applied to another Tibetan Buddhist leader, the Panchen Lama. With spiritual leaders conferred by Qing court, Mongolian tribes naturally submitted to Qing rule. Moreover, Tibetan Buddhist followers belonged to fixed temples, reducing Mongol nomadic ranges from unsettled to semi-sedentary, greatly easing Qing administration. As Kangxi said, one temple outweighs 100,000 soldiers. That's the principle. This effectively strengthened the Manchu-Mongol alliance, enhancing Qing control over Inner Asia. Using Tibetan Buddhism gave Qing emperors dual ruling ideologies. defenders of Confucianism and practitioners of legalism in Central Plains, while uniting Inner Asia through Tibetan Buddhism. Integrating these three formed Qing's ruling philosophy. As a super-large state spanning both regions, Qing lasted 260-plus years due to varied governance models, unlike traditional Central Plains dynasties. So why did it collapse, ending millennia of imperial rule? This relates to agriculture's fundamental dilemma. As mentioned in Part 2, Chinese society underwent three structural shifts: feudal to aristocratic to commoner. This self-renewal capacity ensured Chinese civilization's continuity. But while social structure changed, economic structure remained unchanged. From Zhou to Qing, China was agriculturally based. Farming remained dynasty's lifeline, with involution as its fundamental trap, meaning as agriculture developed, population grew while labor value decreased. This means any technological innovation is unprofitable. It's better to just put more labor into agricultural production. But the more this happens, the cheaper labor becomes and the less necessary innovation seems.
This creates a vicious cycle. Eventually, agriculture can't feed the huge population, and with land monopolization, the people-land conflict worsens. Past a tipping point, nationwide peasant uprisings erupt.
After wars consume millions or tens of millions, a new dynasty establishes agricultural equilibrium, restarting the cycle. In short, involution is inevitable as long as agriculture dominates the economy. Qing dynasty delayed this conflict by expanding territories and reclaiming wastelands, but couldn't escape the Taiping Rebellion, which killed tens of millions, with involution being a key cause. So what's the solution? The author argues for industrialization and globalization. Simply put, only by shifting China's economic focus from agriculture to industry while engaging globally can we overcome involution. Thus, China's governance model and international status transformed dramatically. Since modern times, Western technology arrived by sea, and China joined global trade via oceans. This means China's modernization is also a transition from continental to land-sea composite nation. China will become the hub connecting continental and maritime civilizations. Traditional governance models, whether Central Plains or Inner Asian, can't fulfill this mission, and traditional ideologies face massive challenges. Reform is imperative. The Qing dynasty's 1912 collapse and imperial system's end were direct consequences of this transformation. Over the next century, China kept reforming to become an east-west civilizational hub. All right, the hub. That concludes 3,000 years of China. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.
Attention! Qijian, author of The Hub, has launched 100 lectures on humanities. He collaborates with 7 top scholars from Peking, Tsinghua, Fudan, and Cambridge to unpack key questions across law, history, religion, political economy, philosophy, and society, mastering 7 disciplines to elevate thinking and break through life's challenges.
This course will debut as a featured new offering during Himalaya's 123 Carnival. Normally priced at 219 won for this Humanities Essentials course.
During the event, just 100 yuan unlocks access. Course links and discounts are in the show notes below.